The dust rising from the stagecoach wheels hadn't even settled when Deanna Morgan realized the foreman's eyes held nothing but trouble for women like her. It was August 1878 in Tulsa, Indian Territory, and the heat pressed down like an iron skillet fresh from the fire. Deanna clutched her carpetbag tighter as she stepped down from the coach, her boots meeting the packed earth with a soft thud. She had traveled 3 weeks from St. Louis, responding to an advertisement for a cook at the Riverside Ranch, one of the largest cattle operations in the territory. The contract she carried in her bag promised fair wages, room and board, and respectful treatment. Mr. Harold Jennings, the ranch owner, had signed it himself and sent it along with her traveling money. But Mr. Jennings was nowhere to be seen. Instead, a thick-necked man with tobacco-stained teeth and small, piggish eyes approached her. "You the cook woman?" Deanna straightened her spine, drawing herself up to her full height of 5 feet 6 inches. At 23 years old, she had learned that showing fear to men like this was the quickest way to invite trouble. "I am Miss Deanna Morgan, the cook hired by Mr. Jennings under contract. Name's Foster. I'm the foreman here." He looked her up and down in a way that made her skin crawl. "Jennings took sick last month. Died 2 weeks ago. I'm running things now." Diana's heart sank, but she kept her expression neutral. "I'm sorry to hear of his passing. However, I have a signed contract." Foster spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "Contract was with Jennings. He's dead." "Things are different now." "A contract is a contract, Mr. Foster. It binds the ranch, not just the individual who signed it." His eyes narrowed. "You one of them educated women think you know the law. I can read and write if that's what you mean. And yes, I know my rights." Foster stepped closer and Deanna resisted the urge to step back. "Here's how things work now, Miss Morgan. You want the job, you work for half wages, and you'll be doing more than cooking. Laundry, cleaning, whatever else needs doing. Take it or leave it." Fury and fear warred in Deanna's chest. She had spent her last dollar to get here. She had no family to return to in St. Louis, and winter would be coming in a few months. But she also knew that agreeing to Foster's terms would set a precedent she might never recover from. "Those terms are not acceptable, Mr. Foster. I will honor my original contract or I will seek employment elsewhere." "Elsewhere?" Foster laughed, a sound like gravel in a bucket. "Lady, there ain't no elsewhere in Tulsa. This is the biggest ranch for 50 miles. You walk away from here, you'll be begging on the streets by nightfall." "Then I will beg." Deanna turned away from him, her hands trembling but her head high. She had taken perhaps 10 steps when she heard Foster behind her. "You'll be back, and when you are, the terms will be worse." Deanna kept walking, though she had no idea where she was going. The main street of Tulsa stretched before her, a collection of rough wooden buildings baking in the afternoon sun. A general store, a saloon, a bank, a hotel that looked like it might collapse in a strong wind. Men stood in clusters along the boardwalks, watching her with curious eyes. A woman alone was an unusual sight here, especially one clearly in distress. She passed the saloon and heard laughter spill out into the street. Her stomach growled, reminding her that she hadn't eaten since dawn. The few coins in her pocket wouldn't last long. Deanna blinked back tears of frustration. She had been so careful, so sure she was making the right choice. The contract had seemed legitimate, the opportunity real. The general store's door stood open, and Deanna stepped inside, grateful for the shade if nothing else. A woman stood behind the counter, perhaps 40 years old, with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a practical bun. "Can I help you, dear?" Diana's carefully maintained composure cracked slightly. "I hope so. I'm looking for work, cooking, cleaning, anything respectable." The woman's expression softened with sympathy. "You just come in on the stage." "Yes, madam. I had a contract with the Riverside Ranch, but the foreman says it's not valid anymore since Mr. Jennings passed. Foster. The woman said the name like a curse. That man is mean as a snake and twice as slippery. Been trying to run that ranch into the ground so he can buy it cheap from Jennings' widow. She paused, studying Deanna. My name is Ruth Harper. My husband and I run this store. Deanna Morgan. Well, Miss Morgan, I wish I had work for you here, but we barely scrape by as it is. However, there might be someone who can help with your foster problem. Who? Mountain man named Tobias Reed. Lives up in the hills north of here, brings in furs and game to trade. He doesn't come into town often, but he's due any day now. Word is he worked for Jennings years back before he took to the mountains, helped build that ranch up from nothing. If anyone could make Foster honor that contract, it'd be Tobias. Deanna felt a flicker of hope. Where might I find him? Like I said, he should be in town soon. In the meantime, you need a place to stay. There's a boarding house 2 doors down run by Mrs. Carmichael. Tell her I sent you. She's decent enough. I don't have much money. Ruth reached under the counter and pulled out a small burlap sack. We need someone to help unpack the supply wagon when it comes tomorrow morning. You do that, and I'll pay you enough for a night's lodging and a meal. Diana's throat tightened with gratitude. Thank you, Mrs. Harper. I won't forget this kindness. We women have to look out for each other out here, dear. God knows the men won't always do it. Diana left the store with directions to the boarding house and a slightly lighter heart. Mrs. Carmichael turned out to be a stern-faced woman with a surprisingly soft heart. She gave Deanna a small room at the back of the house and included dinner without charging extra. That night, Deanna lay on the narrow bed and stared at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of Tulsa settling in for the night. Somewhere a dog barked. Music drifted from the saloon down the street. She thought about her mother, dead these 5 years, and her father who had drunk himself into an early grave the year after. She thought about the seamstress shop in St. Louis where she had worked until the owner retired and closed the business. She thought about the advertisement that had seemed like Providence. Wanted, cook for ranch in Indian Territory, good wages, room and board. Inquire Harold Jennings, Riverside Ranch, Tulsa. She would not let Foster steal this opportunity from her. The contract was legal and binding. She just needed help enforcing it. The next morning, Deanna reported to the general store before dawn. The supply wagon arrived an hour after sunrise, loaded with goods from Fort Smith. For 3 hours, Deanna hauled crates and barrels, her arms aching and sweat soaking through her dress. But she didn't complain. Honest work had never frightened her. Ruth paid her as promised and threw in an extra $1. You work harder than my last 2 clerks combined. If you don't find something better, come back. I'll figure out a way to keep you on. Deanna pocketed the money gratefully and bought a small lunch from a street vendor, jerky and hard biscuits that sat heavy in her stomach. She spent the afternoon walking the perimeter of town, noting possible employers, but everywhere she asked, the answer was the same. No work available. Times were hard. Maybe try the ranch. On the 3rd day, Deanna was sitting on the boarding house steps, contemplating her dwindling funds and diminishing options, when she heard a commotion from the main street. She stood and walked toward the noise, curious. A man rode into town on a massive bay horse, leading 2 mules loaded with furs. But it wasn't the furs that caught everyone's attention. It was the man himself. He was huge, easily 6.5 feet tall, with shoulders that seemed broad enough to block out the sun. His arms, visible beneath a worn leather vest, were roped with muscle. Dark hair fell past his shoulders, tied back with a leather cord, and a thick beard covered his jaw. He moved with the easy grace of someone completely comfortable in his own body, scanning the street with eyes the color of winter ice. Tobias Reed. It had to be. Diana's heart hammered as she watched him dismount in front of the general store. This was the man who might be able to help her. But he looked wild, more animal than civilized man, and she felt suddenly uncertain. Ruth Harper appeared in the doorway of her store, a smile breaking across her face. Tobias Reed, as I live and breathe, thought maybe the bears finally got you. His voice when he spoke was deep and rough from disuse. Takes more than bears, Ruth. Got good furs this time, best of the season. As they began to negotiate, Diana forced herself forward. She couldn't afford to be timid. If this man could help her, she needed to ask. She waited until there was a pause in the conversation, then cleared her throat. "Excuse me, Mr. Reed." He turned those ice-blue eyes on her, and Diana felt pinned by his gaze. Up close, he was even more imposing. The muscles of his arms and chest strained against his clothing, and she could see scars on his hands and forearms, evidence of a hard life in the wilderness. "Madam." His tone was polite but wary. "My name is Diana Morgan. Mrs. Harper suggested you might be able to help me with a problem." Tobias glanced at Ruth, who nodded encouragingly. "What kind of problem?" Diana took a breath and explained everything. The contract with Jennings, her arrival, Foster's attempt to change the terms, her current predicament. As she spoke, she watched Tobias's expression darken. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Foster always was a bastard. Pardon my language, madam. I've heard worse. Can you help me? Depends. You got that contract with you." Diana pulled it from her bag and handed it over. Tobias unfolded the paper and read slowly, his lips moving slightly. When he finished, he refolded it carefully and handed it back. "This is legal and binding. Jennings' signature is right there. Foster has no right to change the terms." That's what I told him. He didn't care. Tobias's jaw tightened. "He will care. Let me finish my business with Ruth here, then we'll ride out to the ranch. I don't have a horse. You can ride one of my mules. They're gentle enough." An hour later, Diana found herself perched atop a mule, following Tobias Reed north out of Tulsa. The ranch was about 5 miles from town, and the ride gave her ample time to study the mountain man's broad back as he rode ahead of her. He sat his horse like he was born to it, moving with the animal in perfect rhythm. Everything about him spoke of strength and competence. She found herself grateful he was on her side. "Mr. Reed," she called out, "may I ask you something?" He half turned in his saddle. "Call me Tobias. And yes, Mrs. Harper said you worked for Mr. Jennings years ago." "I did, helped him start the ranch about 10 years back. Good man, fair man. He gave me a stake when I decided to head into the mountains. Said I'd always have a friend at Riverside Ranch." "Why did you leave?" Tobias was quiet for a moment. "Wasn't meant for ranch life, I guess. Too many people, too many rules. Mountains suit me better." "Don't you get lonely?" He shrugged those massive shoulders. "Sometimes, but I prefer my own company to most folks. Yet you're helping me." "You got wronged. That matters." He paused. "And I owe Jennings. Man's not even cold in his grave, and Foster's already trying to destroy what he built." They rode in silence after that, the sun beating down mercilessly. Diana's back ached from the unfamiliar saddle, and her legs were already sore, but she didn't complain. The ranch came into view eventually, a sprawling collection of buildings nestled against a bend in the Arkansas River. Cattle dotted the surrounding grassland, hundreds of them. As they rode into the main yard, ranch hands stopped their work to stare. Foster emerged from the main house, his expression darkening when he saw Diana. "What the hell is this?" Tobias dismounted in one smooth motion and stood facing the foreman. Even from her perch on the mule, Diana could see the difference between the two men. Foster was thick and strong from years of ranch work, but Tobias was something else entirely. He looked like he could break Foster in half without much effort. "This here is Miss Deanna Morgan," Tobias said calmly. "She has a contract with Riverside Ranch, legal and binding contract signed by Harold Jennings himself." Foster spat. "Jennings is dead. I'm in charge now." "Ranch doesn't belong to you, Foster. Belongs to Mrs. Jennings, and a contract is a contract. This ain't your business, Reed. You don't even work here anymore. I'm making it my business." Tobias took a step forward, and Foster involuntarily took a step back. "Miss Morgan is going to work here under the original terms of her contract. Full wages, room and board, cooking duties only. That clear?" Foster's face flushed red. "And if I say no, then I'll ride out to Mrs. Jennings and explain how you're trying to swindle a woman out of fair wages and break legal contracts. Last I heard, she was staying with her sister in Fort Smith. That's only a day's ride. I'm sure she'd be very interested to know how you're running her ranch." The threat hung in the air. Foster looked from Tobias to Deanna and back again. Several ranch hands had gathered watching the confrontation. Deanna could see the calculation in Foster's eyes. If word got back to Mrs. Jennings that he was behaving dishonorably, he might lose his position entirely. "Fine," he finally ground out. "She can have her damned job, but she steps one toe out of line and she's gone." "She'll do her job same as anyone else," Tobias said. "And you'll treat her with respect." Foster glared but said nothing more, turning and stalking back into the house. Deanna slid down from the mule, her legs shaky with relief and residual fear. "Thank you," she said to Tobias. "I don't know how I can ever repay you. Don't need repayment, just needed doing." He gestured toward a building behind the main house. "That's the cookhouse. Your quarters should be attached. You need help getting settled. I'll manage." Tobias nodded and gathered his mule's reins. "I should get back to town, finish my trading." Deanna felt a sudden, unexpected reluctance to see him leave. "Will you come back, to check on things?" Something flickered in those ice-blue eyes. "You expecting more trouble?" "I'm not sure." Foster didn't look happy. "Foster's never happy. But I'll come by in a few days, make sure everything's square." As Tobias rode away, Deanna stood in the ranch yard and watched until he disappeared from view. Then she squared her shoulders, picked up her carpetbag, and walked toward her new home. The cookhouse was larger than she had expected, with a massive iron stove, long wooden tables, and shelves stocked with supplies. Her quarters were a small room off the back, barely big enough for a bed and washstand, but it was clean and private. She had stayed in worse. That evening she cooked her first meal for the Riverside Ranch. Beef stew with vegetables, fresh biscuits, and apple pie made from dried apples she found in the pantry. The ranch hands filed in at sunset, dirty and tired from a day's work. They eyed her with curiosity and varying degrees of suspicion, but they didn't speak much. Foster ate separately in the main house, which suited Deanna just fine. One of the younger hands, a boy who couldn't have been more than 18, lingered after the others had left. "That was real good, madam. Best meal we had in weeks." "What's your name?" "Jimmy Walsh, madam." "Thank you, Jimmy. I'm glad you enjoyed it. You really got Tobias Reed to face down Foster for you. He was kind enough to help me, yes." Jimmy whistled low. "Wish I could have seen that. Foster acts tough, but everybody knows Reed could tear him apart like wet paper." "Mr. Reed seemed very reasonable to me." "Oh, he is, madam, long as you're on his good side. But I seen him break up a bar fight once. 3 men went after him with chairs and bottles. He put all 3 of them down without breaking a sweat. Didn't kill nobody or nothing, just made sure they couldn't get back up." Diana absorbed this information. "He lives alone in the mountains." "Yes, madam. Got himself a cabin up near Sterling Mountain, or so I hear. Nobody knows exactly where. He comes into Tulsa every few months to trade, then disappears again. Some folks say he's hiding from something. Others say he's just not fit for civilized company. He seemed perfectly civilized to me. Jimmy grinned. Maybe he's got a soft spot for pretty ladies. Diana felt her cheeks warm. That's quite enough of that, Jimmy Walsh. Don't you have work to do? Yes, madam. He ducked out, still grinning. Diana cleaned the cookhouse in the fading light, her mind wandering to the mountain man who had so casually appended Foster's plans. She found herself hoping he would indeed return in a few days. The thought of being alone here with Foster made her uneasy, despite the other ranch hands' presence. Over the next several days, Diana fell into a rhythm. She rose before dawn to start breakfast, served 3 meals a day, and kept the cookhouse clean and organized. The work was hard but satisfying. The ranch hands warmed to her quickly, appreciating good food after months of Foster's poor cooking. Even the gruffest of them started saying thank you. Foster, however, remained hostile. He found reasons to criticize her work, complained about the cost of ingredients, and made snide comments when he thought she couldn't hear. Diana ignored him as much as possible and focused on her job. On the 4th day after her arrival, Tobias returned. Diana was kneading bread dough when she heard the commotion in the yard. She wiped her flour-covered hands on her apron and stepped outside to find Tobias dismounting from his bay horse. He carried a string of freshly caught fish. "Thought the ranch could use some variety," he said by way of greeting. "River trout. That's very thoughtful." Diana accepted the fish, intensely aware of how his hands dwarfed hers when their fingers brushed during the transfer. "Would you like to stay for dinner?" "It's the least I can offer after all your help." Something that might have been a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "I could eat." Foster appeared from the barn, his expression souring when he saw Tobias. "Didn't expect to see you again so soon, Reed. Just checking in. Making sure everything's going smooth." "Everything's fine. She does her job, I leave her alone." "Glad to hear it." Tobias's tone made it clear he didn't entirely believe Foster. At dinner that evening, Diana prepared the trout alongside roasted potatoes and greens. She set a plate aside for Tobias and brought it to him where he sat on the cookhouse steps, clearly uncomfortable eating with the ranch hands inside. "You don't have to eat out here," she said. "You're welcome at the table. I'm fine where I am." Diana hesitated, then sat down beside him with her own plate. "Then I'll eat out here too." He looked at her with surprise. "Ain't proper you eating alone with me." "I don't care much about proper, Mr. Reed. Tobias, I mean. You helped me when no one else would. That means something." They ate in companionable silence for a while, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. The evening was cooler than the day had been, a welcome relief from the August heat. "This is good," Tobias said eventually, nodding at his plate. "Thank you. The trout were fresh, made all the difference." "You're a fine cook." "It's what I do." Diana paused, gathering courage. "Can I ask you something personal?" He tensed slightly but nodded. "Jimmy Walsh said you live alone up in the mountains. Don't you ever want companionship? Someone to talk to?" Tobias took his time answering. "I had a family once, long time ago. Parents, 2 sisters. We had a small farm in Missouri. I was 18 when the raiders came through during the war. Burned everything, killed everyone. I was out hunting, came back to find them all dead." Diana's heart clenched. "Oh, Tobias, I'm so sorry." "Was a long time ago, like I said. After that, I didn't much see the point in getting close to people. Seemed easier to keep to myself. That's no way to live. It's kept me alive this long." Diana set down her fork. "I lost my parents too, mother to fever, father to drink. I know what it's like to feel alone, but shutting people out doesn't honor the ones we lost. They'd want us to keep living, really living. Tobias turned to look at her fully for the first time. In the fading light, his eyes seemed softer, less guarded. "You're a wise woman, Miss Deanna Morgan." "I don't know about wise. Just trying to figure things out same as everyone else." They talked until the stars came out, sharing stories of their pasts, their hopes, their fears. Deanna found herself laughing at Tobias's dry humor and moved by his unexpected gentleness beneath the rough exterior. When he finally stood to leave, she felt disappointed the evening had to end. "I'll come by again in a few days," he said. "Make sure Foster's staying in line. I'd like that." After he rode away, Diana cleaned up the dinner dishes with a lightness in her chest she hadn't felt in years. Ruth Harper had been right. Tobias Reed was a good man. More than that, he was fascinating in a way Deanna couldn't quite explain. Over the following weeks, Tobias's visits became more frequent. Sometimes he brought game or fish. Sometimes he just appeared at mealtimes, ate on the cookhouse steps, and talked with Diana as the sun set. They discussed everything and nothing. Books they had read, though Tobias admitted he wasn't much for reading. Places they wanted to see, dreams they had buried long ago. Deanna found herself looking forward to his arrivals with an intensity that both thrilled and frightened her. She began taking extra care with her appearance on the days she thought he might visit, pinning her hair more carefully and wearing her best dress. She told herself she was being foolish, that a mountain man and a cook had no business thinking romantic thoughts about each other. But her heart didn't listen to logic. Tobias, for his part, seemed drawn to the ranch in a way that surprised even him. He had spent years avoiding human connection, content with his solitary existence in the mountains. But Diana's warmth and intelligence pulled at something deep inside him. He found himself thinking about her when he should have been checking his trap lines. He wondered what she was cooking for dinner, whether she was safe, if Foster was giving her trouble. One evening in early September, as they sat on the cookhouse steps, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple, Tobias cleared his throat awkwardly. "Deanna, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "You ever think about leaving here, going somewhere else?" Her heart sank. "Are you saying I should leave?" "No, that's not what I mean." He struggled for words, clearly uncomfortable. "I mean, do you plan to stay at this ranch forever?" "I don't know. Why do you ask?" Tobias stared at his hands. "I was thinking about how lonely it gets sometimes, in the mountains." Deanna hardly dared breathe. "Yes. And I was thinking maybe it wouldn't be so lonely if someone else was there, someone to talk to." He glanced at her, then away. "Someone like you. Tobias Reed, are you asking me to come live with you in the mountains? I know it's not a proper proposal or nothing, and I don't have much to offer, just a cabin and whatever I can hunt or trap. But I could take care of you, keep you safe. And I think maybe we could be happy together." Diana's eyes stung with unexpected tears. "That's the sweetest thing anyone has ever said to me. So you'll think about it." "I don't need to think about it." She reached out and took his massive hand in both of hers. "Yes, yes, I'll come with you." Tobias looked stunned. "You will?" "I will. But not right away. I have my contract to honor, remember? 3 more months. Can you wait that long?" A slow smile spread across his bearded face, transforming him from intimidating to almost boyish. "I've waited 32 years to feel like this. 3 more months won't kill me." They sat together as darkness fell, hands clasped, neither speaking but both feeling like something fundamental had shifted in their worlds. For the first time since his family died, Tobias Reed allowed himself to hope for a future that included someone else. And Deanna Morgan, who had come to Tulsa expecting only a job, found herself dreaming of a life she had never imagined possible. The next morning, Foster cornered Deanna as she was hauling water from the well. "Saw you getting cozy with Reed last night," he said with an unpleasant leer. Real cozy. That's none of your concern, Mr. Foster. It is if it affects your work. You contracted to cook for this ranch, not to entertain mountain men. Deanna set down the water bucket and faced him squarely. My work has been exemplary and you know it. The men are well fed, the cookhouse is clean, and I have never once shirked my duties. Who I speak with in my free time is my own business. Your free time belongs to this ranch. My contract specifies my working hours. The evenings are my own. Foster's face reddened. You're getting mighty uppity for a woman with no prospects. Actually, I have excellent prospects now. In 3 months, when my contract expires, I'll be leaving to marry Mr. Reed. It gave Deanna fierce satisfaction to see Foster's jaw drop. She picked up her water bucket and walked past him into the cookhouse, her head high. Word of Deanna's engagement spread through the ranch like wildfire. The hands congratulated her, happy for her but also sad to lose such a good cook. Jimmy Walsh looked heartbroken until Deanna promised to teach him her recipes before she left. That evening, when Tobias arrived, Deanna met him in the yard and threw her arms around his neck. He caught her easily, his massive arms encircling her waist and lifting her clean off her feet. I told Foster we're getting married, she said breathlessly. Are we? His eyes twinkled with amusement. Well, you asked me to come live with you. I assumed marriage was implied. It was. Just wanted to make sure you knew that. So you're proposing properly now. Tobias set her down gently but kept his arms around her. Deanna Morgan, you're the finest woman I've ever known. Smart and strong and brave. You make me want to be part of the world again instead of hiding from it. Will you marry me? Yes. She reached up to touch his bearded face. Yes, Tobias Reed, I will marry you. He bent his head and kissed her then, a kiss that started gentle and grew deeper, full of promise and passion too long denied. Deanna's knees went weak, and she clung to his broad shoulders, feeling the corded muscle beneath her hands. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. 3 months seems like a very long time, Deanna whispered. Worth the wait, Tobias replied. Give us time to get ready. I'll need to expand my cabin, make it fit for 2 people. And we should get married proper, with a preacher and everything. I'd like that. Over the following weeks, Tobias divided his time between the mountains and the ranch. He was building additions to his cabin, he explained, and hunting to stockpile meat for the winter. But he came down the mountain every few days to see Deanna, and each visit left them both more certain they were making the right choice. Deanna threw herself into her work with renewed energy, knowing each day brought her closer to her new life. She experimented with recipes, making sure Jimmy understood all her techniques. She also began assembling a trousseau of sorts, trading her wages for fabric and sewing a new dress for the wedding, along with practical clothes suitable for mountain living. Foster watched these preparations with barely concealed anger. He had lost his chance to exploit Deanna's labor, and worse, he had been made to look foolish in front of the ranch hands. But with Tobias Reed's shadow hanging over everything, there was little he could do beyond glare and mutter. One crisp October evening, about 6 weeks into Deanna's contract, Foster's resentment finally boiled over. Deanna was closing up the cookhouse for the night when Foster appeared in the doorway, blocking her exit. She could smell whiskey on him and immediately tensed. You think you're something special, don't you? His words were slurred. Too good to work for honest wages. Got to have a mountain man fighting your battles. Please move, Mr. Foster. I'm tired and want to go to bed. I'm tired too, tired of your attitude, tired of you making me look bad. I've done nothing to you. I've fulfilled every term of my contract. Foster stepped further into the cookhouse, and Deanna's heart began to race. She was alone with him, and the bunkhouse was 50 yards away. Even if she screamed, would anyone hear? Your contract says you work for this ranch. That means you work for me, and I say you've been neglecting your duties. That's not true. It's true if I say it's true. He moved closer. But maybe we can come to an arrangement. You be nice to me, I'll forget about your failings. Diana looked around desperately for a weapon. Her hand closed on a cast iron skillet. Don't come any closer, Mr. Foster, he laughed, an ugly sound. What are you going to do, hit me with that pan, if I have to? Foster lunged forward, reaching for her. Diana swung the skillet with all her strength, connecting with his shoulder. He howled in pain and stumbled back, but his momentum carried him forward. His hand caught her wrist, twisting until she dropped the skillet. Diana screamed. The cookhouse door crashed open, and suddenly Tobias was there. Diana had never seen him truly angry before. His face was like carved stone, his eyes blazing with cold fury. He grabbed Foster by the collar and physically threw him out the door. Foster landed hard in the dirt of the yard. Don't move, Tobias said, his voice deadly quiet. Don't even breathe wrong. Foster scrambled to his feet, his hand moving toward the gun at his hip. But Tobias was faster. He closed the distance between them in 2 strides and seized Foster's wrist, squeezing until bones ground together. The gun fell from Foster's nerveless fingers. You don't touch her, Tobias said. You don't look at her. You don't speak to her. She's done with this ranch, done with you, as of right now. Her contract is void the minute you laid hands on her. Tobias released Foster's wrist with a shove that sent the foreman sprawling again. I ever see you near her again, I'll break every bone in your body. Understand? Foster nodded, all his drunken bravado gone. Tobias turned to Diana and his expression immediately softened. You hurt. He twisted my wrist, but I'm all right. Her voice shook despite her best efforts to control it. Get your things. You're leaving with me tonight. But my contract doesn't matter anymore. He violated it when he put hands on you. You don't owe this place anything. Diana realized he was right. Her hands were still trembling with reaction, but she managed to nod. Give me 10 minutes. She gathered her belongings quickly, aware of ranch hands clustering in the bunkhouse doorway, drawn by the commotion. Jimmy Walsh caught her eye and gave her a sad little wave. She waved back, grateful for his friendship. When she emerged with her carpet bag, Tobias was waiting with his horse and mules. He had saddled the gentler mule for her and secured her bag to the other. There's a boarding house in Tulsa run by Mrs. Carmichael, he said. You can stay there until the wedding. I'll sleep in the barn at Harper's store. Won't be proper for us to be under the same roof until we're married. When should we get married? Soon as possible. Tomorrow if we can find a preacher. Diana managed a shaky smile. That works for me. They rode through the darkness toward Tulsa, Diana trying to process everything that had happened. She had been so frightened when Foster cornered her, and then Tobias had appeared like an avenging angel. She had felt his protectiveness before, but seeing it unleashed was something else entirely. How did you know? She asked as they rode. How did you arrive at exactly the right moment? Couldn't sleep tonight, kept feeling like something was wrong, finally decided to ride down and check on you. He glanced back at her. Good thing I did. Very good thing, thank you, Tobias. For everything. You don't need to thank me. Taking care of you is my job now. My privilege. They arrived in Tulsa near midnight. Mrs. Carmichael was not pleased to be roused from bed but softened when she heard what had happened. She gave Diana her best room and promised to stand as witness at the wedding. Tobias lingered in the doorway, clearly reluctant to leave. You going to be all right? I'll be fine. A little shaken, but fine. Lock this door behind me. I'll be by first thing in the morning to find a preacher. Tobias, Diana stepped closer to him. I love you. I should have said it before, but I'm saying it now. I love you. His expression transformed, a look of such wonder and tenderness that it took her breath away. "I love you too, Deanna, more than I thought I could love anyone. You brought me back to life." He kissed her gently, then forced himself to pull away. "Tomorrow," he promised. "Tomorrow we start our new life." The next morning dawned clear and cool, the first real hint that autumn was settling in. Deanna woke feeling equal parts nervous and excited. Today she would become Mrs. Tobias Reed. Today her new life would truly begin. Mrs. Carmichael helped her dress in the new gown she had sewn, a simple but elegant creation in deep blue calico. Deanna pinned her dark hair up and studied herself in the mirror. She looked different somehow. Happier. More alive. Tobias arrived at 9, looking uncomfortable in clean clothes and with his beard freshly trimmed. He had clearly made an effort, and Diana's heart swelled with affection. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "You look quite handsome yourself." Ruth Harper and her husband joined them, along with Mrs. Carmichael, and they all walked together to the small church at the edge of town. The preacher, Reverend Williams, had agreed to perform the ceremony despite the rushed nature of it. He was a kind man with understanding eyes who asked no difficult questions. The ceremony was simple and brief. Diana and Tobias spoke their vows in steady voices, promising to love and honor each other all their days. When Reverend Williams pronounced them man and wife, Tobias kissed Deanna with such tender passion that Mrs. Carmichael had to dab at her eyes. Ruth had arranged a small celebration at her store, with cake and cider for the handful of guests. Deanna felt overwhelmed by the kindness of these relative strangers who had become friends. "You take care of her," Ruth told Tobias sternly. "She's special, this one." "I know she is. I will. By noon, Mr. and Mrs. Tobias Reed were riding north into the mountains, leaving Tulsa and its troubles behind. Deanna had said goodbye to her brief life at Riverside Ranch without regret. Her future was ahead of her now, not behind. The ride into the mountains took most of the afternoon. The terrain grew steeper and more rugged, but Tobias navigated the paths with easy familiarity. They followed a creek upstream, crossing it twice, before finally climbing a ridge that opened onto a small valley. Tobias's cabin sat in a clearing surrounded by pines and aspens. It was larger than Diana had expected, built from hewn logs with a stone chimney and a covered porch. The additions Tobias had made were obvious, the new wood lighter than the old, but everything was solidly constructed. "It's not much," Tobias said, suddenly uncertain. "It's perfect." He helped her down from the mule and showed her inside. The cabin was one large room now, with a sleeping area curtained off at one end, a kitchen area with a cast iron stove, a rough wooden table and chairs, and a stone fireplace for heat. Furs covered the plank floor, and the walls were chinked tight against the cold. It was rustic but cozy, exactly the kind of place Deanna could imagine making into a home. "I built the bed frame new," Tobias said, showing her the sleeping area. "Got a real mattress and everything, traded for it in Fort Smith." The bed was indeed new, sturdy, and wide, covered with quilts and furs. Deanna felt her cheeks warm as she contemplated sharing it with Tobias tonight. As if reading her thoughts, Tobias cleared his throat. "I want you to know I'll be patient. I know this is all happening fast. We can take our time with the marriage part of being married." Deanna turned to face him, this massive, gentle man who had somehow captured her heart completely. "Tobias, I didn't marry you to take things slow. I married you because I love you and want to be with you in every way." Relief and desire flared in his eyes. "You sure?" "I'm sure." He crossed to her in 2 strides and gathered her into his arms, kissing her with a hunger that had been building for weeks. Deanna responded with equal passion. her hands exploring the muscled planes of his chest and back. He lifted her easily and carried her to the bed, laying her down on the quilts with surprising gentleness. What followed was awkward at times, as first times often are, but also achingly tender. Tobias was patient and careful, mindful of his strength, and Deanna gave herself to him without reservation. They learned each other's bodies in the fading afternoon light, and when it was over, they lay tangled together, breathless and complete. "Mrs. Reed," Tobias murmured against her hair. "My wife. My husband," Deanna replied, trailing her fingers through his long hair. "I love the sound of that." They spent the next several days in blissful seclusion, learning the rhythms of married life. Tobias taught Deanna the layout of his land, showing her the creek where he got water, the root cellar where he stored food, the smokehouse for meat. Deanna organized the cabin, making small improvements that turned it from a shelter into a home. She hung curtains, arranged wildflowers in a jar, and established a system for cooking and cleaning. They fell into an easy partnership. Tobias hunted and trapped, bringing home game that Deanna prepared and preserved for winter. She tended a small garden plot Tobias had established, harvesting the last of the season's vegetables. In the evenings, they sat by the fire, talking or reading aloud from the few books Tobias owned. Sometimes they just sat in comfortable silence, enjoying each other's presence. Deanna discovered that Tobias had a playful side that emerged once he felt completely comfortable. He would sneak up behind her while she was cooking and wrap his arms around her waist, nuzzling her neck until she laughed and swatted him away. He taught her to shoot, standing behind her and guiding her hands, though they rarely got much practice done because he kept getting distracted by kissing her. The physical side of their marriage only grew better as they learned what pleased each other. Deanna marveled at how someone so big and strong could be so gentle, and Tobias seemed to worship every inch of her with hands and mouth until she was gasping his name. "I never knew it could be like this," Deanna admitted one night as they lay in bed, her head on his broad chest. "Like what?" "So easy, so right. I always thought marriage would be about compromise and sacrifice. But being with you doesn't feel like either. It feels like becoming more myself." Tobias tightened his arms around her. "I know what you mean. I spent so long thinking I was better off alone. Now I can't imagine going back to that. You make everything better, brighter." October slipped into November, and the weather turned colder. Snow began to dust the high peaks above their valley. Tobias worked from dawn to dusk, cutting firewood and making final preparations for winter. Deanna helped where she could, and together they laid in supplies that would see them through until spring. One morning in mid-November, Diana woke feeling queasy. She barely made it outside before losing her dinner from the night before. Tobias found her a few minutes later, pale and shaky, leaning against the cabin wall. "You sick? Should I ride for a doctor?" Deanna shook her head slowly. "I don't think I'm sick. I think I might be pregnant." Tobias stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then slowly, a smile spread across his face. "You sure?" "No, not completely. But I've missed my monthly courses and this morning sickness. It's how my mother described her pregnancies." He let out a whoop of joy that echoed off the mountains and swept her up in his arms, spinning her around. "We're going to have a baby. Tobias, put me down before I get sick on you." He set her down carefully, then immediately dropped to one knee, pressing his ear to her still flat stomach. "Hello in there, little one. This is your papa. You be good to your mama now, you hear?" Deanna laughed, threading her fingers through his hair. "Tobias Reed, you're ridiculous. I'm going to be a father." He looked up at her with such wonder that tears sprang to her eyes. "After everything I lost, I get to have a family again, because of you." The winter months were long and sometimes harsh, but Deanna had never been happier. The cabin stayed warm and cozy no matter how fierce the winds howled outside. Tobias doted on her as her belly began to swell, refusing to let her do any heavy work. He brought her presents from his trap lines. A fox pelt for warmth, interesting stones, once a perfect bird's nest fallen from a tree. They talked about names, about what kind of parents they wanted to be, about the future they were building together. Tobias carved a cradle from pine and lined it with the softest furs. Deanna sewed tiny clothes, her heart full of anticipation. Spring came slowly to the mountains, but eventually the snow melted and wildflowers began to bloom in their valley. Deanna was huge now, moving slowly and finding it hard to get comfortable. Tobias hovered anxiously, clearly worried about the approaching birth. "What if something goes wrong?" he asked one night. "We're so far from town, from a doctor." "Women have been having babies in remote places since the beginning of time," Deanna said. "We'll be fine. Maybe we should go to Tulsa, stay there until the baby comes. I don't want to leave our home. And besides, I trust you to help me. We'll manage together." On a warm day in early June, Diana's pains began. Tobias went pale but held himself together, boiling water and gathering the supplies they had prepared. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Tobias looked terrified, but he never left her side. He held her hand, wiped her forehead, and told her over and over how strong she was, how much he loved her. Finally, as the sun was setting, their son entered the world with a lusty cry. Tobias cut the cord with shaking hands and wrapped the baby in a soft blanket before placing him in Diana's arms. "He's perfect," Diana whispered, tears streaming down her face. "He's beautiful." Tobias kissed her forehead, then the baby's. Thank you for giving me this." They named him Thomas after Tobias's father. He had his father's dark hair and his mother's eyes, and from the beginning, he was clearly going to be a big boy like his papa. The months after Thomas's birth were exhausting but joyful. Tobias was a devoted father, rising in the night to bring the baby to Deanna for feeding, changing diapers without complaint, and spending hours just staring at his son in wonder. Deanna watched her rough mountain man transform into a gentle, loving father, and she fell in love with him all over again. When Thomas was 3 months old, they made the journey to Tulsa to have him baptized and to show him off to their friends. Ruth Harper cried when she held him, and even Mrs. Carmichael's stern facade cracked. They also learned that Foster had been fired from Riverside Ranch. Mrs. Jennings had finally returned from Fort Smith, discovered what he had been doing, and sent him packing. A new foreman had been hired, and the ranch was thriving again. "Justice," Tobias said with satisfaction. Over the next few years, Diana and Tobias built a life that exceeded anything either had imagined. They added 2 more children to their family, a daughter they named Rose, and another son they called Daniel. The cabin expanded again to accommodate their growing brood. Tobias taught his sons to hunt and fish, to respect the mountains and the animals that lived there. Deanna taught all her children to read and write, using the books they accumulated over the years. The family was largely self-sufficient, but they made trips to Tulsa several times a year for supplies and to maintain connections with the outside world. Thomas grew tall and strong like his father, serious and thoughtful. Rose was fearless, climbing trees and tracking animals with her father almost before she could walk. Daniel was the sweet one, always ready with a hug and a smile. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Deanna and Tobias sat on the porch of their cabin, watching their children play in the clearing. Thomas, now 9, was showing Rose and Daniel how to skip stones in the creek. "You ever regret it?" Tobias asked. Leaving civilization behind, living up here in the middle of nowhere. Diana leaned against his shoulder, solid and warm. Not for a single moment. This is exactly where I'm meant to be. I think about how close I came to losing you. If you had just accepted Foster's terms, if I hadn't come to town when I did. But you did come, and you stood up for me when no one else would. You made sure my contract was honored, and in doing so, you changed both our lives. Tobias kissed the top of her head. Best thing I ever did. Best thing we ever did was find each other. The contract was just the beginning. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Diana reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She had come to Indian Territory looking for honest work and fair treatment. She had found that, but so much more besides. She had found love, partnership, family, and a sense of belonging she had never known before. The contract that Foster had tried to manipulate had been just a piece of paper. But what it represented, fairness, honor, keeping one's word, those things had mattered deeply. They had mattered enough for a mountain man to come down from his solitude and fight for a woman he barely knew. And in that fight, both of them had found something neither had known they were missing. Years continued to pass peacefully. The children grew, adding their own chapters to the family story. Thomas eventually married a woman from town and started his own ranch in a valley not far from his parents'. Rose surprised everyone by becoming a teacher, riding to Tulsa 3 times a week to educate the children there. Daniel stayed closest to home, learning his father's skills as a trapper and hunter. Tobias's hair turned gray, as did Deanna's, but their love never faded. They still sat together in the evenings, still made each other laugh, still reached for each other in the night. Their children brought grandchildren, and the cabin that had once been a lonely bachelor's shelter became the heart of a sprawling, loving family. On a cool October evening many years after that first fateful arrival in Tulsa, Diana and Tobias sat together on their porch, wrapped in a shared blanket. Their oldest grandchild was visiting, a boy of 8 who had begged to hear again the story of how his grandparents met. "Tell him," Tobias said to Deanna with a smile. "You tell it better." So Deanna told the story of a young woman who had traveled to Indian Territory with nothing but a contract and hope, of a foreman who had tried to cheat her, and of a mountain man who had emerged from the wilderness to make sure justice was done. She told of love found in unexpected places, of families built in the shadow of mountains, of happiness earned through honor and courage. The boy listened with wide eyes, then asked, "Grandpa, were you scared when you faced down that bad foreman?" Tobias chuckled. "A little. But your grandma was worth fighting for, still is." "That's the most important lesson," Deanna added, pulling the blanket tighter around them both. "When something matters, when someone matters, you stand up and fight for them. You keep your word. You honor your commitments. Good things come from that." "The best things," Tobias agreed, kissing his wife's cheek. As the stars came out above the mountains, the old couple sat in comfortable silence, their grandchild now asleep against Tobias's side. They had lived a good life, a full life, built on a foundation of mutual respect and deep love. The contract that had brought them together was long since fulfilled and forgotten, but the promises they had made to each other endured. In the distance, a wolf howled, and Tobias instinctively tightened his arm around Deanna. She smiled, knowing he would always be her protector, even after all these years. And he would always have her love, her loyalty, her partnership. Their story had begun with injustice and the determination to make things right. It had grown into something beautiful and lasting, a testament to what could be built when 2 people chose each other and refused to let circumstances or other people's cruelty define their future. Deanna Morgan had come to Tulsa seeking fair treatment and honest work. Tobias Reed had come down from his mountain to ensure she got both. In the process, they had found what they had both been missing for so long: a home, a family, and a love strong enough to weather any storm the Wild West could throw at them. And so they lived out their days in the mountains they both loved, surrounded by children and grandchildren, secure in the knowledge that the choices they had made all those years ago had been the right ones. The foreman had tried to change the terms of her contract, but the mountain man had made sure the original terms were honored. And from that simple act of integrity, an entire legacy had grown, a legacy of love, family, and the unshakable belief that doing what was right would always lead to something worth having.